MTHFR, Gene Mutations and Epigenetics. Let's talk. Hi, this is Dr. David with another episode of Your Health, Your Choice. I am so happy and honored to have our guest on today, Dr. Ben Lynch. If many people in our holistic world know of Dr. Lynch, really one of the main people in bringing MTHFR mutation knowledge forward to our world. One of the very first people who really started talking about this openly many years ago. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But hi, Ben. It's so nice to see you again.
Awesome to be here, David. Been too long since I've seen you, man.
It has been so long. I know that we kind of keep up with each other through texting and kind of aware of what each other's doing, but it's always nice when we actually get some time alone to chat, because I know we always have great conversations.
Definitely.
Now, Ben is a naturopathic physician. He is the author of a very popular book called Dirty Genes, a breakthrough program to treat the root cause of illness and optimize your health. I was thinking if I can come up with an acronym to put all of those together, but I failed miserably, so I gave up on that little endeavor right then and there. So welcome. So what I'd like to know is, first of all, MTHFR. Now, the first person that I ever found had an MTHFR mutation was my dad, who very quickly said, I have the mother what? And, I've heard other people say that, but I do give my father credit for being the first person back in, I think it was 2011, 2012, the first person who actually said that. I'm like, yeah, I see where you got that from.
Yeah.
So what I'd like for you to do is, first of all, just tell us a little bit about the MTHFR mutation. We're going to certainly talk about much more of all the things that we've learned over the years since then. But let's kind of start there, since that's where our root of knowing each other started off at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it was probably around the same time you tested your dad is when I tested myself and found out that I had the mother effer genetic variation myself and all my kids and my wife. And I was like, I'm a bad dad. So we have to first kind of back up and realize that, anytime we talk about genetics, we tend to have this fear or this block, and we just kind of, shut down. And it's like, oh, this is going to be overwhelming and hard. But no, it's actually really easy. So you just think of the genes in your human body as having different jobs. And, the larger your company, the more employees you have and the more jobs you have. And so the human body has 18,000 or so different areas in the human body that require different genes, and they do different jobs. And MTHFR just has one of these 18,000 different jobs. So it's a very important job. And when you hear of folic acid, you think, okay, that's folate, and I'll just supplement with folic acid, I'm good. But that was back in the 80s when we introduced folic acid into our food supply, if you can call it food, processed garbage. And individuals who have this genetic variation of MTHFR, this gene, it doesn't convert folic acid very well at all. In fact, the job of MTHFR is to take one type of folate that is way beyond the activity of folic acid. Folic acid has no physiological activity in the human body at all. So folic acid has to be transformed by multiple other different genes, different jobs, before it even gets to the MTHFR gene. And MTHFR produces the body's number one form of folate in circulation. So over 80% of the folate that is flowing through our body right now and in our brain is made by the MTHFR gene. And if there is a genetic variation in that particular gene, then your levels of methylfolate may not be sufficient. And if they're not, then you might have brain issues, learning issues, cardiovascular issues, pregnancy complications, infertility problems, cancers, and you name it. So it's a very, very important gene. It's a very important job because it controls over 80% of the type of folate in your blood.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, MTHFR stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. We like to say that because it makes us sound real smart. We don't expect anybody to actually memorize that, but it's a nice way to impress people when you're at a cocktail party or something like that. We talk about methylation, and methylation, and the question is, first of all, what is methyl? So a methyl group is a carbon with a few hydrogens hanging off the side. And when we talk about methylation, demethylation, we're really talking about the movement of this carbon with some hydrogens, this methyl group, onto or off of different substances. They could be used to detoxify. It could be used to help us read and open up our genes. And it's also very important in this particular pathway called the methylation, which then moves on to what's called the transsulfation pathway, that amongst many, after several more steps, more than a several, it ultimately can lead to the production of N-acetylcysteine, which is people know as NAC. Or actually, it's cysteine, of which N-acetylcysteine is a supplement, and eventually glutathione, which is the body's most important natural detoxifier, very important antioxidant, something that can be very helpful, something we found low in children with autism in the past, etc. So you could almost think of this methylation pathway as kind of like a circle that's going around, and it kind of can recycle itself. And then there's the tail, which is the transsulfation pathway. More complicated, we'll show more about that, but that's in the gist of what it is. So in a way, I kind of describe it similar to other aspects of biochemistry. Follow the bouncing carbon, and then you kind of have an idea as to what is going on here.
I'd like to just stop you there if I could, David. So you imagine that circle with the tail that David was talking about, and then in order for those methyl groups to get into that circle with the tail, MTHFR is kind of the little regulator. It's like the little flap that allows the ball of the methyl group to get into that circle, into the tail. And if that MTHFR is not producing the little methyl groups of methylfolate get into that circle, then you're in trouble. So you've got to be able to have that flap with the methyl group ball to get in, and MTHFR drives that whole thing.
Absolutely. And, my original introduction to this came back from the really groundbreaking work from Dr. Jill James at Arkansas Children's Hospital, who was originally, had identified this and had found that in her really first sentinel study, that mothers with children with autism were 3.5 times more likely to harbor an MTHFR mutation compared to families of neurotypical. Now, it wasn't proof that, some people took it to mean, oh, MTHFR abnormalities cause autism.
Right.
Clearly, that's not the true statement there. There's plenty of people walking around who don't have autism who have MTHFR mutations. But after discovering that, she then started looking at the various those steps along the way, that circle, methionine, acetylenolmethionine, adenosine, and around the loop to cysteine, homocysteine, and found that children with autism were significantly more likely to have all of those biomarkers lower than neurotypical kids, with the exception of adenosine. And so that was really, again, not proof of cause of anything, but certainly these were some of the earliest biomarkers that we were actually seeing here, and something that was a consistent finding. So, it's something that it was very much part of my world very early on. And then the really fascinating thing is, so we were actually having some fertility issues. So this would have been in 2001, 2002. And when we saw our fertility expert, one of the first things she says is, I want to check Lydia's MTHFR status. And it was the first time I ever heard another doctor outside our world talk about it in the first place. And I'm like, why would you be looking at that? And she said, well, actually, there's only 5 reasons why people get recurring miscarriages, and this is one of them. And giving them methylfolate, that can really make a big difference. And I was like, oh my God, this is known outside of our autism world. I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then following up with that, a couple years later, I was having some palpitations, turned out to be some anxiety. And I'm sitting in the cardiologist's office, and like right on the wall there, he has a picture of the entire methylation pathway and MTHFR and coronary disease. And again, I'm like, asked him about it. Oh yeah, this is like a significant, well-known thing about, potential for cardiovascular risk. And I'm like, oh, wow. So that's kind of like when it really started opening up for me of like, wow, this is kind of an essential thing that not just us people in the holistic world actually know about. So that was kind of like my early introductions to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then yet we continue to struggle with the, what is it, the American College of Genetic Counselors. And we struggle with the CDC, in Medscape. And, I've got some hit pieces on me talking about utilization of methylfolate to support pregnancies, just as you discuss as well, David. But the CDC goes on to say that despite having an MTHFR genetic variant, it's safe and effective, and you must use folic acid regardless of your MTHFR status. And I was like, God. So, yeah.
Yeah, open up your Stryer biochemistry textbook, because that may tell you something differently.
Yes.
And so yeah, that was it never ceases to amaze me what we'll hear from government and other organizational authorities on things like that. And I know that we've had to build some tough skin through the years, and when you have data to back yourself up, when you have results to back yourself up, that really helps us grow our skin. Now, I also do want to give a shout out to Starling Hill at support.net, MTHFR support.net. She's actually the one that hooked you and I up. I don't know if you remember that. This was back in September of 2012. September of 2012, I actually went back through my old emails to find that original introduction
Oh,
email
wow.
that she made, and when she got us on the phone that very first time. So I thought that was a nice little trivia concept when I kind of thinking back
Yeah.
how far back you and I go. It's almost been 10 years.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah,
She's a networker.
yeah, no doubt, no doubt. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your background. How did you get into naturopathic medicine, into health in general?
Well, I think it stems back to, I grew up on a ranch, and, we had a thoroughbred hunter jumper ranch where we had 44 horses. And, anytime you have a bunch of animals, the likelihood of them getting sick is pretty high. So we always had the vet over, constantly. And I was always intrigued when the vet would come over and work on a sick animal and they would get better. And I became most intrigued when the vet would come over and there was a mare, who was, being bred multiple times, but she was barren. She was not, conceiving a foal at all. So he injected her with a few things, and lo and behold, she got pregnant. I was like, oh, that was interesting. So I was always curious at that stage, and my stepmom was an OBGYN. And so, I witnessed her in the hospital and all that too. So I just kind of had that medical surroundings, I guess. And so that really influenced me. But what happened, so that was around me. I was going to be a large animal vet. I went on rounds with large animal vets for a while. And then I realized how many times that we had to put them down. I was like, okay, that's not good. So plus I didn't want to get up in the middle of the night. And it was in India that I was introduced to Ayurvedic natural medicines and herbs and so on. And so then that was brought in, and then, lo and behold, Bastyr University was in my background. I went to Bastyr University after getting my cell and molecular biology degree from University of Washington. And first year at Bastyr, I was introduced to Bruce Lipton's work. And Bruce Lipton talked about how the perception of the environment through our senses, our five senses, influences our genetic expression. And I was like, what the hell is he talking about? So I was just really enamored and just engrossed by his whole lecture. And so that really paved the way to learning about that. And then it was environmental medicine, about how toxicants can affect our health in a significant way. And we had all these patients exposed to mold and arsenics and mercuries and pesticides and herbicides. And then we would treat them all the same way, and some would get better, some would not, and some would get worse. And I kept talking to the professors and my supervising the supervising docs is like, look, why are some getting better and some not? It's like, this isn't good. We got to change it somehow. It's like, well, that's just how it is. I was like, no, it's got to be genetics. It's got to be epigenetics. It's got to be something that we can tweak here. And the first thing that I saw was with N-acetylcysteine and DMSA and glutathione, the intolerance to that and the huge amount of sulfites and the redness in the face. And so I started recommending molybdenum at an early stage because I knew about the sulfite oxidase, and then that really helped them a lot. So it was all incremental, as with a lot of things, David. And then somebody asked me about bipolar disease one day, and I was just rattling off bipolar disorder. I was just rattling off the usual recommendations. Like, what? It's been about 5 years since I graduated. I'll type bipolar and folate into PubMed because I know there's a connection. I typed in bipolar PubMed, and it talked about blah, 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 MTHFR. I was like, what's that? So I highlighted MTHFR, plugged it back into PubMed, and it spat out MTHFR genetic variation. It's like, what's that? I don't really know. Pregnancy complications, infertility problems, cancers, cardiovascular issues, embolisms. Like, whoa, okay, this is serious. And then that's when I reached out to, I started Googling more, and then it was Sterling, and then it just kind of snowballed.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So tell me, so obviously, again, it sounds like kind of like MTHFR was your first kind of like, the first light bulb that
Yes.
kind of like led us both to kind of like really starting to explore these things a lot more. How did you then move from the understanding of MTHFR's role in everything, and then kind of into the larger methylation pathway and the single nucleotide polymorphisms, the SNPs that we use the term SNPs to do this,
Yeah.
and realizing that yes, MTHFR is an important gene, and that's one of the things that I constantly have to profess to my patients, because my goodness, the number of things that people have attributed to MTHFR when they're really talking about, yeah, it's not just that. Yes, it's the release as we talked about, but at the same time that it was much more than that. So kind of tell me a little bit about how you transition from looking at the importance of this one gene to kind of like the directions that we're heading now.
I think it was by force, really. I mean, a lot of things that you learn in your life are through pain. And so I was working with MTHFR. It was pretty simple. I mean, what's there to support MTHFR? I mean, riboflavin is the cofactor, vitamin B2. Okay, got to make sure that's sufficient. Eat leafy greens, avoid processed foods, be careful of some various medications. There's not really that much to it. Consume liver. All right, supplement with methylfolate if your homocysteine is elevated, greater than 9 or so micromoles per liter. And I was like, okay, so that's kind of it. And there was a kid that I was working with, and his parents, and I think he was a 9 or 10-year-old kid, and he had MTHFR. I forget what variants he had, but let's say he was homozygous, and recommended the methylfolate like I did with everyone. And I got an email, I think the next day, saying that the kid was having a horrific temper tantrum, broke the light bulbs in the car with a baseball bat, the headlamps, and was just storming around the house. I'm like, oh, crap. And, I could have been that doctor that said, oh, that's not the methylfolate because that works for everyone. That's the usual type of doctor that just kind of sweeps it under the rug. We know it's, they have MTHFR, so they need the methylfolate. So we can't rule that out. So now we have to add something else. But I'm really, more careful with that. And it's like, okay, well, the only thing that really changed was the methylfolate. So let's stop that. And we stopped it, and he was still irritable. And then I went back to Abram Hoffer's work, and Abram Hoffer talked about niacin, and then niacin can really, really calm people down. And so I recommended 50 milligrams of niacin for this kid, and it just like within minutes calmed him down. And so then I'm like, okay, what the hell? What happened here? So then I pulled out, I started researching and pulling out all these pathways. I've probably looked in Jill James's work at this point, and realized that, MTHFR is just a gateway to hundreds of other genes. And so if you release MTHFR, I equate almost like the first domino of those rack of dominoes that you set up. And it's such an important gene. If that first domino doesn't fall, all the rest of the dominoes don't fall. But if you push that first domino, by damn, that whole thing, as long as the other ones are set up, it's going to go. And you've got a potential mess on your hand. So, you start pushing that first domino on people, you don't know what's going to happen. So I've been very, very cautious with methylfolate. And then it led me to having to look at a lot of other genes in the human body. And I was acutely reminded that MTHFR is one gene out of about 18,000. And I kind of put my tail between my legs at that point.
Yeah, I've been using the domino analogy for very many years, and as I explain to people, like so if you have a domino broken, you can always reach over and flick the next one. But what happens then? And are those other dominoes broken?
Yes,
And so
good point.
I kind of explain to people that it's not just a linear, because even though there's going to be side reactions and then other pathways that are going to be potential there. So I kind of go on to share that it's not just like a domino that you and I may set up in our house with a bunch of dominoes. This is like one of those YouTube dominoes where once the thing starts going, all types of things can start going.
That's
and
right.
If you don't know what you're doing there, then all of a sudden, yeah, it's cool to watch when it all works on TV, on TV, but if one doesn't work, stop, one goes, like all the other cool stuff ain't happening. So I think it's a really thing, because because I've had people say to me, oh, why don't we just give more glutathione then, if that's the end result of that tail, of which again they're not recognizing. Well, then you're kind of not tending to the methylation cycle there. But I'm also saying, but you want those other dominoes to fall properly, so that all the other things are going on in the body. So I appreciate that that we're using the same analogies. I know that yours and my brain, we kind of think, and we kind of come up with things similarly with quite frequency. You mentioned briefly about epigenetics. Okay. I'd like for you to talk more about it, and then we'll kind of get into a little bit more exchange about it. But please introduce the topic to our audience.
Yeah, well, I'll share it through a story. I was standing in the hallway when I was about 17 or 18, and my mother was talking with a friend of ours, and she said, "Oh," and I don't know why I was standing and listening to this conversation. But she said, she turned to me, she goes, "Oh yeah, Ben, you're an adolescent teenager at this point. Schizophrenia runs in your family, in your family history, and it tends to hit kids in their puberty. So, be mindful of that." And I was like, "What? Wait a minute." So I have some schizophrenics in my family, and I'm now 17, 18 years old, and I might wake up tomorrow schizophrenic. Yeah. I'm like, holy crap. So that kind of scared the crap out of me. So yes, there are genetic risks for various conditions. You go to the doctor, you fill out the family history boxes, cancers of various types, and cardiovascular issues of various types, and allergies of various types. And so you check all these boxes. Some of you might get those same things as your parents and your grandparents and your siblings, and some of you may not. Well, what's that may or may not? That's the epigenetics. So it's the things that help control what your genes do or they don't do. And what those control points are your actions or your inactions. So it's actually your epigenetics are your actions or your lack of action. And the genetics are the tools that take action upon your decisions that you do every day, or don't do every day. So, by the fact that I'm sitting here having a conversation with David and you're listening, you're inputting various things in your head from this, and it's triggering certain genes. And if I say the word lemon and you imagine a big sour lemon, what's happening in your mouth right now? You're salivating. And what the hell happened there? Well, you heard the word lemon and you associate lemon with sour. You've experienced lemons before, and then your body prepares for that. And that was an epigenetic experience that you just had. So yes, some things are genetic, but most things are epigenetic. Most things are driven by your choices that you make or don't make. And that's the whole concept of dirty genes. Dirty genes is basically the concept of a gene that is not performing at its best. And my agent wanted me to call the book 7 Deadly Genes. And I was like, these genes aren't really that deadly. They're actually very easy to clean up. And then my writer was like, clean up, dirty genes. I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant. That's it. Because you can take your genes and you can literally clean them. And if you look at the cover of Dirty Genes, it looks like it was wiped clean. So you can wipe your genes clean through your epigenetics, basically through your lifestyle, diet, and environment, and your mindset.
Gotcha. Also, so much in my world, especially thinking from the preconception, that we do with our preconception to infancy. And also realizing that, obviously it's not just what our actions or interactions are, but realistically, what was our mother's actions and interactions when we were growing inside.
Yes.
And then, the saddest part about this is, like, as we're learning about the forever toxins and the plastics and the glyphosates that are so ubiquitous to our world, that we're needing to start looking for another planet at this point, because unless we're going to be on a island somewhere in the middle of the ocean where things haven't wafted to us, it's like almost impossible for us to be avoiding some of these things that have such a negative impact on our body and how all of that goes. And it's one of the more depressing thoughts that I get is just like, are we doomed because of what our society, what big industry, what big pharma has done to us. We haven't even talked about the effects of the microbiome on epigenetics on the microbiome, which is totally disastrous for a lot of people. And gosh, so I know that one of the things that you and I also talked about is recognizing that we don't live in a perfect world. We never will. How can we make things as good as we possibly can? Now, I wanted you to talk a little bit about strategy, okay? And how you are utilizing this type of testing to kind of make an individualized approach. I do things similarly as well, but tell us a little bit about this because I know that this is a project that you've been working on for a while.
Yeah. So I'm all about optimization. And, there's some doctors that really, enjoy working with really severe current, conditions like broken arms or heart surgeries or brain surgeries or, cancer treatments and what have you. I love working in the realm of prevention and optimization. That's where I really shine in and thrive in. And that's how I live my own life for the most part. And I teach my kids the same way. So strategene is a genetic test that is not just, spits back, you have this gene and you do that. It provides actually a map. So when David and I are talking about dominoes, you have to see the whole kind of domino map. You can't just look at the individual dominoes in isolation and know what the pattern is and how the dominoes are going to fall. You need to see them as a whole. And so what strategene does is it looks at very, very important pathways in your human body that are involved in many, many everyday things that you struggle with or you experience. And you have to have those pathways working or you have a common problem. And a lot of these common problems don't necessitate a doctor's visit, but they really affect your way of life. You have a chronic runny nose, you're not going to go to the doctor. If you're not falling asleep very easily, you're not going to go to the doctor. If you have PMS every other month or monthly, it sucks, but you're not going to really go to the doctor. So it's these aggravating problems. And so what strategene does is it looks at the genes involved in a lot of these common pathways, and then it overlays the genetic variants that are present. So in these genetic variations, all they tend to do is really slow the gene down in terms of its function, or it may speed it up in terms of its function. And then what's the consequence of that? Well, the consequence of that is there's another gene in front of it, and there's a gene behind it. And so you see quickly the influence of other genes on other genes, how they're connected. But beyond that, you also see what vitamins and minerals are needed for each of the enzymes that these genes produce, because genes produce enzymes. And then even beyond that, there's another layer that shows you how the environment controls the genetic expression. So, because if you just see that you have a certain gene like MTHFR and the nutrient riboflavin helps support MTHFR and MTHFR makes methylfolate, and that's all you know, then you think, oh, I don't have an MTHFR genetic variant, I'm fine. And I don't need to worry about B2 or methylfolate. I'm just going to go on my merry way. And the flip side could be, oh, I have MTHFR, I need to supplement with methylfolate, but you don't also see that, MTHFR is slowed down by folic acid. I mean, there's research papers that say that. You don't know that MTHFR is slowed by being hypothyroid. So having hypothyroidism slows your MTHFR genetic expression. You're like, oh, yeah, I have a thyroid dysfunction. Well, that affects your MTHFR genetic expression as well. So, and there's other genes like that help work with glutathione production. So everybody talks about N-acetylcysteine producing your glutathione. It's like NAC is like the poor man's glutathione. Just take NAC and you'll have glutathione. No. NAC is a couple steps up from your glutathione. You actually have two genes in that process to happen. You need sufficient magnesium, which most people don't have, but then you also have environmental problems like mycotoxins. If you have mycotoxins, your ability to convert that N-acetylcysteine into glutathione ain't going to happen because the mycotoxins slow the synthesis of glutathione. And so you see that right on your strategene report. And so it's overwhelming at first to see a map of that you've never seen before. I mean, imagine, being a 6-year-old given a map of New York City and you say, okay, we are here. I want you to meet me at the other end of town in an hour and a half and use this map. This kid is going to be like, damn, Dad, what do I do? So that's what it's like to get strategene. But after you learn how to use it, the map is super useful and you can use it your entire life. So, and strategene is not a tool. Most genetic tests tell you to take this supplement, to do that, to eat this, don't eat that. But strategene doesn't do that. You have to think yourself through it. It's basically a map. It's a guide. And it depends on where you are in your life, and you will always refer to it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that brief discussion. I know that you could probably go for many, many, many hours into the details. And I know that that's kind of like as you get into the deeper strategy, and and I know that you're very active in teaching others, both patients and providers, about how to utilize all of this stuff. But still, it still defies me. Not defies me. I realize that you and I have kind of gotten much deeper into this, of like how there are doctors out there who are very well intentioned. Oh yeah, I talked to a doctor, someone who transferred into the practice. Yeah, we know our MTHFR status. I'm like, that's awesome. What else do you know?
Yeah.
Now let me show you what you can know.
Right.
And that really does make a really big difference. I know that one of your other interests within this realm is that of histamine. So tell me a little bit about about histamine, the role of vitamin, and also, one of the things that I've been very much on top of myself also is just optimizing vitamin D and zinc levels and the role that has in terms of modifying or keeping the immune system under control from that hyperinflammatory way. So talk a little bit about histamines and what you've been working on with strategene and with your experience.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. You start learning one thing and then it kind of leads into another. And MTHFR, is interestingly associated with histamine, because the first step to, for the primary way that your body starts the initial breakdown of histamine is through that circle that Dave was talking about earlier, through the methylation cycle. And that starts with the methylfolate that MTHFR makes. And so if your MTHFR enzyme isn't working very well, or your glutathione levels are not very good, then your histamine levels can be high. So histamine is not a bad compound, just like homocysteine isn't a bad compound. We give laboratory markers bad raps because, you say, look, homocysteine is associated with cardiovascular disease. Well, high homocysteine is associated with cardiovascular disease. You need homocysteine. Without it, you're dead. And without histamine, you're going to be struggling too. You're going to be a sad, lethargic, couch potato that doesn't want to learn anything, or, and you won't have an immune system to fight anything. It'll just be blah. So you need histamine to do a lot of functions in your human body. The thing is, you want that sweet spot, like the three bears. You want the perfectly, the perfect chair, the perfect bed, and the perfect temperature of your oatmeal. So with histamine, it's the same thing. With high histamine, you've got irritability, headaches, you got motion sickness, nausea, you got pregnancy complications of all types. You've got interstitial cystitis, you've got diarrhea, you've got a hyperactive immune system, you have asthma, you got skin disorders, you get bit by a mosquito, you're the one who's got that big welt. You could write your name with your fingernail on your arm and like have red ink from all the elevated welts from the high histamine. So the elimination of histamine is extremely important. The balancing of histamine is really important. You don't want too fast of a production. You don't want too fast of a release of histamine from your cells. Histamine is already made commonly, and it's stored in these cells. And when there's a trigger, like an infection, or if you hit yourself really hard, there's an instant response where histamine is released. But if you have moments of stress, like you're anxious or irritable or mad, you can also release histamine. High estrogens can also release histamine. So if you're obese or you're on birth control and your estrogens are really high, then you can be high histamine as well. And so what strategene does is we have a map of how your histamine is produced and eliminated in various parts of your body. But every single gene that is associated with histamine production and elimination and receptors is on this pathway, and there's actually there's not many at all. There's only like 8 genes, so it's actually really easy to map out. But where it gets really powerful is looking at the epigenetics and the nutrients that are involved in histamine metabolism. So if you even just forget the genetic testing of histamine and you just look at the things that influence the production and the release of histamine, and you start removing those from your lifestyle or making some lifestyle adjustments, you can have huge impact. Well, I will say the genetic testing is powerful because if you have a reduced ability to clear histamine and you see that on your pathway, then you're like, okay, I need to be more diligent and compliant, and work harder to make some of these lifestyle changes. And maybe I will do some supplements to help support the clearance of this histamine and maintain the storage. And people it's unbelievable. We actually had a mother leave a review on one of our histamine products, and she said, my kids stole it. It was the title of the review, or so good, my kids stole it. And she said, my teenage son struggles with autism, and he has allergies and he gets irritable often because, high histamine, you get runny nose and you can get irritable. And he actually wrote his name. She took a picture of it and he wrote his name, Dante, on the lid of the bottle. And he goes, this is mine, Mom. And he feels better within minutes, because if your histamine is too high, it's an excitatory neurotransmitter. And we all know that a lot of autistic children, adults, are excitotoxic. So you calm them down by removing these excitatory compounds. And if you do it quickly and properly, you can get your kid back pretty quickly.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Now, before we wrap up, and again, one of the things that you and I have been talking about, but kind of in a more general sense, our show is called Your Health, Your Choice. I know that you and I have talked about medical choice, expressed frustrations, recognizing that where we are here in Florida, where there's considerable more allowance of medical choice compared to what's happening over on the West Coast over there. Maybe
Shocking.
talk just a little bit of some of the frustrations that and some of the things that are coming up for you, and some of the things that may be holding back for you to be able to be doing the optimal thing that you think you should be doing.
Oh, well, censorship first and foremost is the worst. JP Sears did a very, very good video. If you type JP Sears and you type life jackets, why everyone has to wear a life jacket. It's kind of synonymous with what's going on with the vid right now. So I think the hardest part for me is being able to serve people with the information that they need and deserve to have. David, you and I are really good at researching and assimilating research and putting it into, applicable, ways and practical ways for people to implement in their daily lives. That's why they appreciate our work. And so when I do a post on vitamin D and how the importance of vitamin D for modulating the immune system, and then it gets flagged and as reported as false information, even though it's reported from, one of the top medical schools in the history or in the nation, and I'm not promoting a product at all. I'm just talking about research and the importance of vitamin D for immune modulation. It's maddening. It's really, really maddening. And it's, there's no talk about vitamin D and how important it is for immune modulation. And you look at the population that is most at risk for viral illnesses, such as VID, in terms of creating cytokine storms. You've got all these folks have really low vitamin D. They all have low glutathione. And it really pisses me off as well when they say this healthy athlete died from COVID at age 21. It's like, well, how do you know that they're healthy just because they're thin and 21? They could have been extremely low in vitamin D. They could have been really high in pro-oxidation and low in glutathione. And he probably was because he was a marathon runner. And so that's high oxidative stress. So don't tell everyone that he was healthy just because he can run a marathon. That doesn't mean anything. So yeah, that's one of my probably biggest frustrations is the censorship, and the politicization politicalization of health. And when people tell me, Dr. Lynch, stay in your lane and talk health, don't get political, it's like, man, they are one and the same, right now.
Yeah, it is. That is a very frustrating thing, and stuff that I've certainly talked about on other episodes, and how as a primary care pediatrician, public advocate, educator, how I'm trying to navigate, get the information out there in a way. And one of the things I've really been focusing myself on is how do I present this information in a way that, regardless of where someone is coming in the health or religious or political spectrum of things, that we all have this commonality of, we want to do the right thing. We want to do the right thing by ourselves. So how can we present things in such a way that also doesn't ostracize 50% of America because we just opened up our mouth? And no matter
Right.
what the topic is, it seems like, it's kind of funny how I joke how medical cannabis happens to be one of the few things health related that gets like 70-80% approval amongst people. It's like, Santa Claus and puppy dogs. Maybe that's one of the few other things that has that level of approval and acceptance within our society. So it's been really, great. And I know that you and I are going to keep on fighting the good fight on this. And we've obviously made progress. And, certainly, one of the interesting things about COVID is that it's brought a lot more people around to what our thinking is, people recognizing, hey, the authorities don't have all the information. They may have completely wrong information. Are they misleading us? And those are things that, obviously, when decisions are made at the time of it, may of course turn out to be that information was wrong, because nobody's going to be perfect. But if you got something wrong, it's okay to admit it. I don't know. To me, or and I'm sorry, or and I love you are probably the three most important
Yeah.
phrases in the English language.
Right.
And so I really appreciate that. Now, tell us real quickly about how people can find you and learn more about what you do.
Well, you can find me at on Instagram, if I'm not eliminated, at Dr. Ben Lynch, and seekinghealth.com is our company website. And Seeking Health will be implementing a learning educational platform. So if I do get banned or ostracized or whatever, or I just get sick of being on social media, we're going to be implementing a learning platform at seekinghealth.com. And but and then book Dirty Genes is available anywhere books are sold. But Dirty Genes is a great place to start if you're interested in anything that David and I have shared today. You can get it on Audible as well, and tune in or tune out as you're learning about your genes, and it's actually really, really helping a lot of folks.
It really is. So that'll be our wrap for today. I want to ask people, if you haven't already, subscribed to our YouTube channel. Check us out on our other social media. We are also putting up some exclusive content on our new Patreon page, some of the things that I've been learning and kind of getting a little more detail with. We're going to have some additional content with Dr. Lynch as well. So thank you, Ben, for this wonderful conversation. I'm glad to stand shoulder to shoulder with you as we continue to fight the fight. And when we put goodness into the world, it comes back to us, even if there's bumps along the way. And just knowing how many people out there who didn't know who you or I was 10 years ago, who are learning about us, we know we're doing the right thing.
Absolutely. And the cool thing too about happiness and joy and love is that spreads pretty darn fast.
It does. All right. Well, have a great day, everybody. And it's been wonderful having you join us.
Thank you, David.